There we go. Unmute. There we go. How's everybody doing out there today? So we got our WWDC. It was, in a lot of ways, very predictable. Let me just check my audio real quick. Audio sounds fine. I always have to check that. Sometimes what I hear and what is broadcast are two different things, especially going to Facebook. Facebook a lot of times is a little bit of a problem. So this is Final Cut TV, and we are going to talk about WWDC in relation to what we as Final Cut Pro editors are enjoying, or what we possibly can look forward to. So we have, Eric says, well, we can look forward to a fall Mac Pro announcement and how it will unleash the new features of Final Cut Pro 11. I'd be very surprised if it was Final Cut Pro 11. I think we're a little early on that one, but I mean, who knows? Who knows? So every other Mac Pro since the G5 has been pre-announced at WWDC. This one, the M2 Mac Pro, was not pre-announced today. They could announce it at any time. Nobody expected it to be released today, but maybe it's not going to come out in 2022. Maybe it's not going to come out until 2023. It's okay. I don't think the Mac Pro is their biggest selling Macintosh by any stretch of the imagination, but I think that it's going to be better than the top of the line right now, which is the Mac Studio. I think it'll beat the Mac Studio pretty handily. We're going to talk mostly about Final Cut Pro, but there are a couple of other odd little things that I want to talk about besides the Mac Pro. The operating system's called Ventura. That's for sure. We know that. Let me see what's going on there. This is one of the odd things. This odd little mount for the camera, because the camera on the MacBook Pro is not very good. This camera is far, far better than this camera. So Apple was saying that the MacBook Pro and the MacBook Air camera, they're not very good. I found that very curious. Now, I did a side-by-side comparison, actually, before I went to NAB, I did a comparison video with my new 2021 MacBook Pro 1080p camera versus the iPhone, and the iPhone absolutely was better pretty dramatically. But the thing about the MacBook Pro camera is it's not as sharp, so it kind of makes you look a little better. You know, you don't see wrinkles and stuff as much. So it was kind of I used it when I was in the hotel room over at NAB. I used the Mac Pro camera, I elevated the Mac Pro so it was eye level, and you use that camera. It looked good. But like you couldn't see, for example, you couldn't see the stripes in my jacket very well. It was just like blurry, just like blurred. So it's not nearly as sharp as the iPhone camera. It's just not. But it's interesting that they actually pointed that out. They actually pointed that out with this new, who did they say is going to put it out? Somebody said, some third party is going to be putting this out shortly. I'm going to get one, although I usually just use a little tripod behind the MacBook Pro when I'm traveling. If I'm not traveling, or sometime I'll go downstairs in the studio, I might get one of those. I'll get one, whatever. It won't be, there'll be third-party people who have them. Philip Allen says, hello from Dallas. You're in Texas. I bet you it's hot there. Eric says it sounds good. Hello from Philadelphia. Philip Allen says, they spent 45 minutes on the iPhone. At least they mentioned Final Cut Pro a couple of times. I'm going to play the clips, the Final Cut Pro clips. I'm going to play those clips because that's more, the idea to me is if Final Cut Pro is on screen, that's a net positive because it's not always on screen at WWDC. So the fact that it was on screen twice, it was on twice, I'm going to play those clips in a little bit, was good. That's a net positive. I mean, the fact that they mentioned Final Cut Pro, they mentioned Final Cut Pro, they mentioned Final Cut Pro. So that was really good. Evers Nature Photography said it was a Belkin. Okay, it was Belkin. I knew it was a third party, but as soon as Belkin comes out with it, there'll be a slew of these on Amazon, imitations and whatever. Doesn't look that sophisticated. And I don't use my MacBook Pro pointing up when I use it. I elevate the MacBook Pro so the camera is right about eye level. I have a stand that raises about 6 or 8 inches. So we have some stuff to talk about for sure. Final Cut Pro, I'm going to play those clips. Maxed out 13-inch M2 MacBook Pro is same cost as maxed out M2 MacBook Air 2500. That surprises you. Why does that surprise you? I've never had a 13-inch MacBook Pro or a MacBook Air. One of the things I like about this MacBook Air that I didn't like about previous MacBook Airs is they don't have that taper on the screen so it goes down to next to nothing. It's consistently thin all the way across. I think that's better for MacBook Air. I'm going to presume the MacBook Air is mostly for traveling, but it's got the M2. It's got the M2. That's fantastic. It's got to be nothing but good stuff for Final Cut. Now, they showed Final Cut twice on M2 machines, 2 times. Is a new version of Final Cut going to be required for M2? I bet you there is going to be a new version of Final Cut, and I bet you it'll be optimized for the M2 architecture. The same way when the Mac Studio came out, they had a new version of Final Cut that came out, optimized for the Mac Studio. So will it see dramatic improvements? It'll see incremental improvements, but the difference between the M1 MacBook Air and the M1 13-inch MacBook Pro is pretty dramatic. It's pretty dramatic. So I think we can expect the same kind of a ratio of improvements to the M2 Max and the M2 Ultra when they come out. And I'm curious about what's going on with the Mac Pro. I'm not in any hurry. I don't really care if it comes out in 2023 or 2022. But I think they're going to have an Apple event in the fall. Apple will certainly have an Apple Mac event in the fall. They've had them for the last 2 years. Both times they introduced the M1 Mac, they introduced the new version of Final Cut Pro. Full point update. When the M1 came out almost 2 years ago, they had Final Cut Pro 10.5. Last year, when the 2021 16-inch MacBook Pro, which which I have, came out, they introduced Final Cut Pro 10.6. So it just goes to reason, not 100%, just goes to reason that their Apple Mac event in the fall is going to have new Macs, maybe the Mac Mini, M2 Mac Mini, or a new iMac, an M2 iMac, and or the Mac Pro is probably the hardest for them to get going. I really don't care if it doesn't come out till 2023. I'm in no hurry for that because that's going to be, I'm going to have to consider whether I get that or wait for the M2 16-inch MacBook Pro, which will probably be out next spring or a year from now. People were asking about a 16-inch coming out now. I said, if it comes out now, it'd be less than a year old. I don't think they're going to do that. That would not make any sense. Clearly, the Mac Pro is not ready for introduction. Yes, that's correct. Although every other Mac Pro from the G5 on has been introduced at WWDC, starting with the G5, the original cheese grater Mac Pro, the cylinder trash can Mac Pro, and the 2019 Mac Pro. All of those have been introduced at WWDC. They didn't come out till later in the year, December, but they were all introduced at WWDC. So if it's not coming out in 2022, that would be to be expected. It wouldn't be at WWDC. If it's going to come out in the fall, if they're going to have a Mac event in the fall, I don't think they'd have a Mac event. Well, they would have a Mac event for a new iMac. Okay? I'm sure they would have a Mac event for an M2 Mac, M2 iMac. They would have a Mac event for that because that would be a big deal. And also, what was missing today? The Mac Mini. The Mac Mini, because the original release of the M1 chip was the MacBook Air, the 13-inch MacBook Pro, and the Mac Mini, all three. This time, MacBook Air, 13-inch MacBook Pro, no Mac Mini. So what's going on with the Mac Mini at this point? It's got to have an M2, doesn't it? You would think. The MacBook Air doesn't have any fan, so it can't be that much of a thermal problem. Why intro a Mac Pro now when supply chain issues mean you probably can't get one until early or mid-23? They didn't do it now. It's not supply chain. Have you seen, supply chain as far as a delay, but we don't know what the Mac Pro is. The Mac Pro is the hardest Apple Silicon Mac they have to bring forward. It's the most complex. They don't want to go back to the cylinder Mac Pro and make another mistake like that they admitted they made before. They don't want to do that. It has to be expandable. It has to have PCIe slots, a bunch of other things. It's much more complex than the other silicon on chip versions of the Apple Silicon Macs they've released so far. It's more complex. They have to make sure they can deliver their products. When the Mac Studio came out, aren't people waiting for like months for the Mac Studio? They still released it. It depends. So the Mac Pro is the hardest. It might be still in development for all we know. Although they, at the spring event, they said we have one more Mac left. That's the Mac Pro. So we know it's coming. That's not an issue. It's just introducing it cold at an Apple event in the fall. They certainly could do that. They certainly could do that. I don't think they're going to do an Apple event just for the Mac Mini. I don't see that happening. But they could do it for the M2 iMac, an M2 Mac Mini, maybe the M2 Mac Pro. They could even introduce it at an Apple event in the fall and saying coming out in the first quarter of 2023. They could say that as well. It's very much about supply issues. Of course, it's about supply issues, but where's the Mac Studio? It's months out. They still released it. It's supply. Of course, it's supply issues, but the Mac Studio is like people are waiting 6 weeks, 8 weeks to get it. Of course, it's a supply issue. When the original Mac came out, when the original Mac Pro came out, when the cylinder Mac Pro came out, it was months away. It was announced in December. People weren't getting it for 3 months, 4 months later. That's not the reason that they won't announce it. If they have some of them available, they would certainly have announced it. Final Cut Pro 10, nothing. Mac Mini Autumn. We saw the Final Cut Pro twice on screen on the M2. It's probably an M2 version of Final Cut Pro that we saw. They didn't announce that, but it probably is a new version of Final Cut, the M2 version, optimized, whatever they want to call it. The last Mac was the MacBook Pro 13-inch. I'm not sure what you mean there. I'm not sure what you mean the last Mac was the MacBook Pro 13. So the M1 MacBook Pro 13, the MacBook Air, and the Mac Mini were almost 2 years, well, 2 years, 2 years this fall, 2 years in November. Were you disappointed that they didn't say anything or refer to anything about Final Cut Pro? They showed Final Cut Pro on screen twice. They showed Final Cut Pro on screen twice. As a matter of fact, let's play those clips. So did you freeze the video when they show Final Cut Pro on the screens to see if it looked any different anyway? I did, but I really can't tell. But that doesn't necessarily mean, well, we know a new version of Final Cut Pro is coming. I mean, that's, whether it's 10.6.4, but if they have an Apple event in the fall, I'm sure it'll be 10.7, so. The missing Mac, Apple talked about last time. The missing Mac is the Mac Pro, right? The Mac Pro. The last Mac was the MacBook Pro 13-inch, you said, but that was out almost 2 years ago. The Mac Pro, the last Mac was the Studio Mac. It came out in the spring. The last Mac... No, the last Mac was the Mac Pro. They said it. The missing Mac, Apple talked about last time. The missing Mac, the last one was not the 13-inch. The 13-inch has already got Apple Silicon. It came out almost 2 years ago. The missing Mac is the Mac Pro. That's what they were referring to. I think they even said Mac Pro, didn't they? I thought they did. Let's see our videos going on here. Let's check one. Oh, look who we got. Luther the cat. He's a gray cat sitting on his gray floor. He's a gentle giant. He's big, big Russian blue, and he's very gentle. He doesn't bother anybody. But let's do some of these two videos that had the. So here we go. I'm just going to play these quickly. Let me unmute the video.
Editing complex timelines in Final Cut Pro, performance is nearly 40% faster than the previous Air. Editing complex timelines in Final Cut Pro, performance is nearly 40% faster than the previous Air.
So 40% faster from the M1 to the M2. 40%, almost 40% faster from the M1 to the M2. So that was a new version. That was a version of Final Cut playing on the M2. It could have been a new version. They didn't specifically say that, but why wouldn't it be an optimized version for the M2? There's no optimizations they can do in Final Cut for the M2? Of course there are. I'm not saying that it was. I'm just saying that it's a possibility. I'm not. Listen, when I say, I say predictions and wishes. I wished for a new version of a wireless mouse that charged on a pad, charged on the charging pad. Did I really think they were going to introduce that? No, I didn't think they would. But that's one of my wishes. I'd like to see the Mac mouse. You just put it on a pad and it charges. None of that stupid bottom cable stuff going on there. So that was that one. We have one more, which is Craig. Oh, that's the cat. That's Luther. Here we go. Here's Craig.
I'm working on this Final Cut project, and I want to pull in a couple of files. With just a click on my desktop, my windows clear the stage and my files are revealed. Now, I can grab these title graphics and drag them over to my Final Cut window. I'll just drop them in right here, and boom.
And boom. There you go. And boom. So two times they showed Final Cut. And the fact that they brought it up is what I'm pleased with. I'm glad that they showed Final Cut. At WWDC, they won. I think they did say there's a new version of Final Cut coming out later in the fall. We'll see if anything happens, but they're not. These two Macs are being released 1 month, they said. The M1 Air and the 13-inch MacBook Pro. I think they said 1 month they'll be available. So once again, normally they don't release hardware around WWDC. They can preview it, but they don't release it. This time they did release it. So let's see what we have here. Apple changed the rules. No more. We release that hardware around WWDC. Let's do it again and again. That becomes too predictable for the public. But they did release hardware around WWDC. They got the MacBook Air and the 13-inch MacBook Pro coming out. So they absolutely did. They are releasing hardware around WWDC. They could release, I'm not sure I'm curious about the Mac Mini more than the Mac Pro. The Mac Pro is difficult. The Mac Pro is the biggest beast that they have to put out. It'll be the most powerful Mac, of course, when it comes out, the M2 version. Jeff Arbio says, I think it's interesting that just about everything from Apple is collaborative except the one thing we need, Final Cut Pro. So far. You don't think that collaboration feature is going to be coming in Final Cut Pro? I think it will. I absolutely think it will. Let me pull this up. I absolutely think it will. Collaboration will be coming to Final Cut Pro. It would be ridiculous if they didn't have it in Final Cut Pro when that's what everybody's waiting for. Final Cut Pro is more complex, obviously. It's very complex. So let me just pull this down here. I don't want that on. Turn that off. So yeah, Final Cut Pro is more complex than some of these other things, but of course I think they're going to have collaboration in Final Cut. It's going to be interesting how they do that, though. Obviously, working with large video files in a collaborative environment is much more difficult. Your assets can be terabytes of assets. How are they going to collaborate with that on the collaboration? But listen, I have faith in the Final Cut Pro team. I absolutely think that they will figure that out. So some people have said Final Cut Pro 11 in the fall. I don't think so. I think we're still going to be, 10.7, but who knows? Who knows what they're going to do with that? All righty, let's do a couple more things. Let's go over some of the details. This is collaboration. So let's turn this one off. And this, the M2. So the M2 looks to be fantastic. It really looks to be great. 35 to 40% faster than the comparable M1, which probably means the M2 Max and the M2 Pro and the M2 Ultra are going to be comparable as far as the increases in performance. M2, it's going to be here within the month. I'll be curious what the M2 13-inch MacBook Pro does compared to my 16-inch M1 Max MacBook Pro and also the Mac Studio. That's what I'd be interested in seeing what's going on. Evers said, you're right. They did mention the Mac Pro last time. Yes, it was the Mac Pro. I pay attention to that for sure. I do think it's coming as well, but I had to laugh when they were talking about collaboration with my family and friends in one of the apps because we know how important it is. Absolutely. They just weren't ready to show. Well, first off, I don't know if they've ever shown a brand new version of Final Cut. They just say a new version's coming out at WWDC. I don't recall. I saw some cool collaboration with Pages. I hope they use that tech with Final Cut Pro. We absolutely hope everybody hopes that. Collaboration has different meanings to different people, processes. That's true, but we know what collaboration is in Final Cut. We know what that means. That means multiple editors working on the same timeline at the same time, colorists working on the same timeline, audio guys working on the same timeline, stuff like that. A cat that is cloaked, talking about my kitty. Grant at Blackmagic has figured out collaboration in a very easy way. Grant is, I really admire that guy. He's done a great job. He's done a great job with Resolve. Did they bring back the touch bar in the MacBook Pro? I thought they had got rid of it. I don't think they did. I thought they had the numbers up there. So Grant at Blackmagic has figured out collaboration in a very easy way. Resolve is easier to collaborate with because all the apps are on tabs. They're all contained in this one massive app. You have Resolve Coloring, you have the audio, Fairlight Audio, you have Fusion, you have the editing tab. They're all just tabs. You don't have to shoot out XMLs and bring XMLs back in and shoot out XMLs and bring XMLs back in. It's all just a tab away, one tab away, one tab away, one tab away. So that makes collaboration a lot easier. It's also a good design. It would be cool if you can upload optimized footage to Cloud Drive and other users can access remotely within a project. Absolutely. That's absolutely what I'm thinking, that they will use proxy media in the cloud, and people can edit that. And I don't know how that's going to work, but let's let Apple figure that out. We are paying them, the Final Cut Pro team, to figure that kind of stuff out, aren't we? So let's go back to a couple more of the graphics. Here we have the M2. Here's the M1 compared to the M2, the die sets. The M2 looks bigger. CPU performance versus power. The M2 is 18% more efficient, more powerful. GPU performance is even more. GPU performance is 35%. 35% more powerful than the M1. Jeff Arbaio says, will you buy an M2? No, I'm not going to buy a MacBook Air or a 13-inch MacBook Pro. Absolutely not. I'm not interested in either one of those two for me. My 16-inch MacBook Pro is the smallest I want to go. I don't want smaller than that. If I was on the road a lot and majority of my stuff was on the road, I'd use the 16-inch. I'll wait till the M2 16-inch comes out. As a matter of fact, I probably will not buy the Mac Pro when they announce it. I'll wait till the 16-inch M2 MacBook Pro comes out, and I'll compare apples and oranges at that point. Which one do I want? I'm very satisfied with the MacBook Pro 16-inch. Very, very satisfied. It's a desktop for me, plus it's portable, both. Whereas my other Mac Pro, my 2019 Mac Pro, is no way that's portable in the least. The Mac MacBook Pro 13-inch M2 has the bar on the home page. Well, let's go look that up. Isn't that interesting? I thought they'd get rid of that too. Let's go look it up. Mac. You said the MacBook Pro, the new one. Here we go. Available next month. Yep, it certainly does. Hold on a second. It certainly does. You can see right there, it certainly does have, it doesn't have the function keys. Let's go back and look at the MacBook Air. I thought the MacBook Air had it then, right? Let me see. Oh, this is the oh, because the other one's not out yet. The M2's not out yet. Okay. Well, who's going to buy an M1 when the M2's a month out? Oh, wait a minute. Maybe I didn't see that. M2. Oh, here we go. Sorry. Let's look at this one. Yeah, it's got function keys right here. Now, isn't that interesting? The MacBook Pro has the bar, but the MacBook Air has function keys. I wonder what the distinction is there between those two. I wonder what the distinction is. I don't know for a fact why they would put it on one. I thought they'd get rid of it too. People like it on the 13-inch? I don't know. I don't know what they're doing there. That'll be the last one that has the touch bar. So GPU performance versus power, 35% more for the M2 over the M1. 40% more operations than the M1. Wow, that's a lot. The media engine, they talked about that. 8K, H.264, HEVC, ProRes, video decode engine, video encode engine, ProRes, encode, decode engine. I missed what they said the improvement was between the M2 and the M1, though. I don't know what the improvement was. If anybody caught that, something has changed because they mentioned it. So here's Final Cut Pro. The first one, this is on the M2. And video performance is, video editing performance is 38% faster on the M2 versus the M1. 38% faster. And of course, video editing performance, I don't know what that means, but they're telling you it's faster, 38% faster. That's more than I thought. Between the M1 and the M2, 38% is a lot. Is that going to follow down the line to the M1 Max, the M1 Pro, and the M1 Ultra? That'll be a dramatic increase in performance. They already do this on smaller scale with iMessage. I can access my message on multiple devices because it's uploaded to cloud. Just do the same thing with footage on Final Cut Pro. Yeah, but the problem is Final Cut Pro, I have 16 terabytes of footage that I can access here. I certainly can't access that much in the cloud. Even if I did ProRes proxy or proxy files, still going to be terabytes and terabytes. Accessing a message is different than accessing terabytes of data, even as proxy files, which I expect them to be, right? Absolutely, I think it'll be proxy files. So video editing performance, 38% faster from the M1 to the M2. That's a lot, don't you think? 38%? So there's ProRes, encode and decode. I'm not sure what the difference is between the M1 and the M2. Something else that came out is Metal 3. How is Metal 3 going to be affected with Final Cut Pro? I presume it's going to be better, right? Metal 3 is better than Metal 2. That's what the whole idea is, I'm sure. And then we have Ventura, Mac OS Ventura. Now the beta will be out, the public beta will be out in July. I think they said 1 month. The public beta for developers is out now, so they can get their hands on that. There's a couple of things I really, really liked that I've seen with Ventura. And the main thing is this stage manager. This looks very, very cool. This is when everything except the app you're working on goes to the side, but you can still see the icons over in the side. That's when Craig he dragged the titles over into Final Cut from the desktop. So you click on the desktop, I guess they all go to the side, and then you drag your files over to the stack of Final Cut Pro, whatever, and then you can drag them right to the timeline. As a matter of fact, let's watch that again.
I'm working on this Final Cut project, and I want to pull in a couple of files. With just a click on my desktop, my windows clear the stage and my files are revealed. Now, I can grab these title graphics and drag them over to my Final Cut window. I'll just drop them in right here, and boom.
And boom. And boom. That I like that feature a lot, because I have windows. I mean, I've shown you my windows here all the time. I got windows and windows and windows. And a lot of times I will have, let me pull this up. So a lot of times I have windows. This is one application. This is Ecamm Live. But a lot of times I have multiple windows, one on top of the other, and I use screen sets and all that. There's my audio right here, right below me right here. My audio level. Here it is. This is what I keep monitoring to make sure everything's going out. This is going out to the stream. So, but I really like that stage manager feature. I really like that. That's one of the main things that I'll be looking forward to. I typically don't do beta, Mac OS beta, but I might. I might partition my MacBook Pro. I have a 4 terabyte, so I can partition off a little section of it and install the beta, because I won't install the beta until Stage Manager is available, because that's what I'm mostly interested in. That is what I'm mostly interested in Ventura. Who guessed Ventura for the next Mac OS name? I don't think anybody did. I don't know. Who, Nick? 5G is just around the corner? Absolutely. So basically, this WWDC as far as Final Cut Pro is concerned, because that's my only real concern, I don't care about the rest of the stuff as nearly as much. I will be getting that little attachment for the iPhone, just for the heck of it. This. I will be getting this. Because it's just so odd that Apple has done this, because what they're saying is, hey, our camera's not that great on the MacBook Pro, so use your iPhone camera instead. It's a much better camera system, and it is. I mean, plus it has 3 lenses and stuff. And notice it's not the selfie side, it's the other side, and you'll be able to monitor that video on screen. I'll be getting one of those little gizmos for the heck of it, but I don't know if I need the first one that comes out. But I just thought that was odd that they're saying, hey, our cameras aren't that great on the Mac. This camera's a lot better. Here's a little device here. That's kind of curious that they did that. So anyway, I think WWDC this time was pretty much exactly to be what was expected, which was the M2 Max. The M1. The only thing that's missing is the M1, the M2 Mac Mini. That's the only one that I'm curious about. The Mac Pro, I was hoping for it to see a demo, but if it's not ready, I don't want it. That's fine. I probably will not get a Mac Pro this time around. I'll probably stick to my 16-inch MacBook Pro. I'm very, very satisfied with it. It's excellent. I got the M1 Max. I got the top line, everything, but I didn't get the 8 terabyte SSD. I got the 4 terabyte. I would not get anything less than 4 terabyte going forward for me, for what I need for it. But I think I'm going to, at this point, I'm probably going to stick with the MacBook, 16-inch MacBook Pros going forward. Well, we'll see. We'll see. Maybe I'll get a Mac Pro too. I don't know. Frame.io is working on camera to cloud. Yes, they are. Frame.io, well, it was actually Filmic Pro that was working on the iPhone camera to Frame.io. So Filmic Pro was working on iPhone camera to Frame.io. They have, I think that's available now with them going forward. So that's that. Do we have anything else? Stage Manager. And we already talked about collaboration. We already talked about that. So that is the editor and assistant editor, right? The smaller one is the assistant editor and the larger one is the Final Cut Pro editor. I'm just making a joke, of course. It could be the other way around. But anyway, I think they did exactly what was expected. They released the M2. Some people were saying, they're not going to release an M2. There's going to be no hardware releases. I was talking to people all along that kept saying, oh, no hardware releases at WWDC, no hardware releases. And I said, I don't know about that. So the B&H had their Facebook, their placeholder ads. It was really bizarre. They had the placeholder ads. Let me just check on something. Yeah, that's there. So let me just check on one thing. Oh, one of the other odd things were they showed the, let me pull this up. They showed the keynote outside. I think it was also in the Steve Jobs Theater. I guess you got your choice of whether you wanted to go outside and see it versus in the Steve Jobs Theater. I probably would have stayed in the theater. The Steve Jobs Theater has got to be an incredible experience. I'd like to go there. We've been trying to go there for the last couple of years for the Final Cut Pro Creative Summit, but we haven't got there yet. Nathan McAvoy says, using Filmic with camera to cloud on a project right now. Very cool. Absolutely. Are you using iPhone cameras? Is that what you're doing, or just a regular camera? The larger one is the assistant editor because they sit more. Well, there you go. Yeah, going to keep my Apple money in the bank until new iPhone. Absolutely. Yeah, I'll be getting the new iPhone 14 as long as there's video improvement. That's the whole thing that I work with. When I get a new iPhone, I get it every year. iPhone. He's worked the iPhone. Very, very cool. So are you using the iPhone footage for B-roll? Is that what you're using? I use my iPhone footage for my main camera most of the time. If I have a specific thing that I'm setting up, I'll take my GH5. So one of the odd things that I noticed, I went into the HTML code for the YouTube page for the keynote, because last WWDC they discovered 16-inch MacBook Pro was mentioned in the keyword for the YouTube feed. So I didn't find that, but I did find that whoever set that page up was on an Intel Macintosh, not an M1, Intel Macintosh, and they were running Mac OS 10.15.7. So they were like a couple years back and using an Intel Macintosh. I thought that was interesting. Not that they're not capable, of course they are. Our friend Roz says, just jumping on your stream late. You can rewatch it from the beginning. Well, we're using it to create quick turnaround social media content of a broader project, that's perfect for that. I shot a 5-minute short with Filmic Pro on iPhone last year. It was an education. So here's the one thing that I don't like using Filmic Pro for, because I do run and gun a lot when I'm filming. I don't like starting and stopping the camera, okay? And I like switching between my 3 lenses, the ultra wide, the wide, and the telephoto. You cannot do that in Filmic Pro. You have to stop the recording, switch the lens, start the recording. You can, I have 2 apps that I can switch the camera live while I'm recording or streaming live. With Prism Studio, I can switch between those 3 cameras and lenses while I'm streaming live. And of course, the native camera app, because I use that all the time. I use the wide shot, and I'll go to the ultra wide, then I'll go to the 2x zoom, or 3x zoom, I guess it is now. I use that all the time. So if I'm doing run and gun, that's what I'm going to use as the native camera app. If I'm doing a stationary locked down shot on a tripod, I'd use Filmic Pro for sure. But if I'm doing run and gun, can't do it. I got to have access to all 3 cameras without stopping the recording. And they said that something about it is difficult, but there's a free app called Prism that I stream with. They can do it. They can do it. And there's one other app that also can do it. So I'd like to see that. If they had that in Filmic Pro, I'd use Filmic Pro all the time. That would be phenomenal. So listen, was it last year? No, 2019. Was it 2019? I forget which. Normally, there's no major update to Final Cut Pro over the summer. This time, I would not bet on that. I think they're going to give us, we could certainly see 10.6.4 over the summer or early fall, and then 10.7 when they do a Mac event in the fall. If they do a Mac event, I presume they will. But they're giving us features, a couple of neat features at a time. In 10.6.2, they gave us voice isolation and dupe detection. And people have been complaining about dupe detection for years and years and years. And I think voice isolation is probably more popular than dupe detection. I get a lot of accolades for it anyway. I see people talking about it all the time. So I guess my point was, normally there's no updates to Final Cut Pro over the summer, except 10.4.9 came out at the end of August. 10.4.9 was a very, very good feature update for Final Cut Pro. That's when they had the proxy workflow. 10.4.9, end of August, the last week of August. So they can put out updates to Final Cut Pro anytime. Well, were you satisfied? I mean, were you satisfied with WWDC? It's pretty normal. Last year, we didn't have any hardware announcements, right? I don't think we did. They were talking about the MacBook Pro. It was in keywords in their YouTube stream, but it never showed up. It came out later in the year, so probably going to be the same. I'm not convinced that the Mac Pro is, that we're going to see it in 2022. There's no reason to rush it. If you need a powerful machine, get the Mac Studio, get the MacBook Pro, whatever you need. There's no reason to rush it. They have to get it right. So I'd rather have them wait. I'm not looking for a Mac Pro. I have to see what it looks like when it comes out, price comparison. But I think I'm going to wait for the M2 16-inch MacBook Pro. That's what I think I'm going to be doing. So what do you think about WWDC? Let me hear some of your comments. We saw Final Cut Pro on screen twice. We saw it on screen twice. Let me just pull that up. Let me see. Final Cut Pro 1. Here's the first time we saw it on screen. I think this is the MacBook Air, right? This is the MacBook Air, I'm pretty sure. So there's Final Cut Pro at WWDC. I appreciate that they put it up. They didn't put many other apps up, but they brought Final Cut Pro up. And they said its video editing performance is 38% faster than the M1. So there's some more stuff. Of course, there's the M2 camera. There we go. What do you think? In other words, there's our buddy Craig. I think Craig's going to be taking over from Tim Cook as far as, I mean, Tim Cook only came on at the very beginning and the very end, which is fine. Craig's more than capable, but here he is doing his stage manager where he drags files over, and he's got Final Cut. That's a MacBook. That's the MacBook. I presume, I'm not positive if he said that was that the new 13-inch MacBook? I don't know. I think he was demoing Ventura with the stage manager. How he can do that and drag the files over and then drag them over to Final Cut and drop them right in there. Very slick. Now, is that a 13-inch? I don't know. You would think that would be the new one, right? The M2s? Well, I know people were saying we weren't going to see an M2. Well, we did see the M2, 2 of them. They're coming out within a month. Not only were they shown, but they're going to be available in a month. Roz says she liked the WWDC keynote, although I missed a lot of it. And was that an M2 MacBook Pro 16-inch? No, it was not a 16-inch. I don't know. I think that was the 13. It was fine, but I would like to see a return to an audience in the theater as soon as possible. It's getting stale with these sleek production videos. Listen, there's people that say, oh, we're not going to ever go back to in-person events. Yes, we are. That's nonsense. We're human beings. We're not virtual beings. The virtual was necessary for a couple years. It's no comparison to an in-person event. There's no comparison. The virtual are necessary, but they pale compared to in-person event. I went to NAB this year. It was great, 52,000 plus people. I think I shook hands with about half of them, and everything was fine. I came back. I didn't even have the sniffles. So we'll be cautious going forward, of course, but in-person beats virtual all the time. Now, a combo of the two is fine. Have an in-person event and a virtual component, but whenever I can, I'm doing the in-person over the virtual. What about you? I mean, the Creative Summit in the fall, it's been virtual the last 2 years, and the Final Cut Pro team did presentations, but it's not the same as seeing the Final Cut Pro team at One Infinite Loop in Cupertino, or seeing them on the Steve Jobs Theater and talking to them in person, have an actual meeting with the Final Cut Pro team, a private meeting where you can talk to them in person. There's no comparison. They had an audience watching the video outside. Many YouTubers were attending. Yes, YouTube's an important component of video production, isn't it? But they also, from what I understand, they also watched it in the Steve Jobs Theater. They showed it in there as well. I guess you had a choice of which one you wanted to do, whether you wanted to go outside or whether you wanted to watch it in the theater. So I'm very satisfied. It's better than it was last year. We saw Final Cut Pro twice. They brought Final Cut Pro up on stage twice. So I'm very glad for that. I'm looking forward to seeing what improvements. Well, they've already said Final Cut Pro is faster on the M2. They probably tweaked the code a little bit to be better on the M2. It's probably a boost in performance by tweaking the Final Cut code to be optimized for the M2 architecture. It's got to be different than the M1 and the M1 Max. But listen, they released the M2s, 2 M2s. Probably, I guess they could release an M2 Mac Mini at any point. They don't need, if it wasn't ready right now, they could release it anytime they wanted to. We also can't figure out why Filmic only offers up to 30 frames per second in 4K. Really? I didn't know that. I thought it offered more. I thought it offered 60 frames per second in 4K. But I don't know for a fact. I'll have to look at it later. Because the iPhone does 60 in 4K. Well, look at it right now. The iPhone does 60 in 4K. I know it does. Yes, it does. What is that? Oh, I don't want that. Let me see what... So the iPhone does... Huh. I'm only getting 30 in 4K too on the iPhone, but I was pretty sure it did 60. Well, let me check on Filmic Pro while you got me curious now. I'll check on Filmic Pro and see what they do. Resolution. Bit. Yeah, I can't look it up right now. Yeah, we could get it in a native app for sure, but for some reason not in film. Okay, that's interesting. Must be some other kind of limitation they have. But anyway, Filmic's a great company. I like those people a lot. Oh, by the way, have you heard of Audio Design Desk? Anybody heard of Audio Design Desk? That app that links up, links up to the Final Cut Pro timeline. It's an audio app that links up. You can link up Logic to it as well. That's called the Bridge. They're going to be on Final Cut TV on Wednesday. This Wednesday, I think. I'm not sure what time it is. But be aware of that announcement coming forward. They're going to be on. We're going to talk to them. If you have any questions, you can send them in. They are going to be on Final Cut TV on Wednesday. We'll have a good interview with them, do some demonstrations and things. All right, I think we're good. I think we're good. Thanks everybody for tuning in. Let me see something here. Let me just pull this up. See if I can pull that up to show you something. So let me show you. I haven't been able to show this to you, but I think I can now. This is I think I can show it to you. Yeah, let me just pull this out of the way. I'm going to show you my dual screen and my MacBook Pro. Let me pull this up. Here you go. Nope. Let me see about here. Let me see. Yeah, another screen over there. I just wanted to show you how I have it set up, and I really like that setup. I like that setup a lot. He says it's the MacBook Air. I'm not sure what that means. The MacBook Pro has a name on the bezel just above the keyboard. There you go. Can't wait for Wednesday. Yes, I've talked to them multiple times. I've talked to them at NAB, and we had a private session a couple months ago. You should have sound. Private session a couple months ago. We had a Zoom meeting, and when they first introduced themselves. But oh, you mean before when I was showing the screen, I had no sound? Yeah, this one. Yeah, this one. That camera you're talking about. Yep. Let me do that again for you then. So this camera, now I have sound. So this is my MacBook Pro screen down here. That's my LG monitor screen up there. So I got it right above it. And I have another screen on this side, a smaller screen. So I have two different screens, this screen, the other screen, and then the MacBook Pro screen right there. So, yeah, just when I switched. just when I switched to the iPhone. I realize that now. I didn't check my audio. See, that's what happens. I make these scenes up and I have audio turned off and they retain that information. Anyway, everybody, thanks for tuning in today. Final Cut TV. You can have, the new podcast is out, Final Cut Pro Radio. Final Cut TV is now its own podcast. I have some episodes that I put up on Apple Podcasts. It's a video podcast. Final Cut Pro Radio is the audio podcast going forward. My name is Richard Taylor. Don't forget to subscribe over there at YouTube. Subscribe, hit the notification bell so you get notified whenever I go live. All right, everyone. I really appreciate everybody tuning in, watching these video streams. I don't have the Partridge Family where there's 20 people on the screen. Everybody's yapping. I come on here so you guys can talk, so I can get you guys, so you have a choice, you have a chance to make